Hello and welcome to Off the Fence, a podcast where we deconstruct difficult decision making so we can try to figure out what keeps us stuck and, more importantly, how do we get unstuck. I'm your host, Karen Covey, a former divorce lawyer, mediator, and arbitrator turned coach, author, and entrepreneur. With me today, I am pleased to have Chelsea Gajewski, and Chelsea is the managing attorney at Sodoma Law Belmont, where she leads a team of family law attorneys who serve the Gaston County, North Carolina community. Her legal practice focuses on custody, child support, alimony, equitable distribution, and other family law related matters. Chelsea serves many different organizations, including as the chair of the membership committee for the family law section of the North Carolina Bar Association, and she's a passionate advocate for children's rights, as well as an active member of the Gaston community and local bar. Chelsea has received many accolades, including the Legal Elite and Super Lawyers Rising Star for consecutive years. Chelsea, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you because I know as a family law attorney, you do a lot of things, right? But really, your sweet spot in an area of expertise that you have that I think is really unique and worth talking about is the place where mental health and family law intersect. So, how can mental health affect a marriage and a divorce? I mean, I think I know in general terms, but I'd love to hear your take and your experience on how mental health can affect not only the marriage, but also the divorce process.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It can affect it in a myriad of ways. I think often when people are coming to us when a divorce, people say, "What's the most common reason you're seeing people are getting divorced?" For me personally, it's something that they've noticed when they were dating or married, and they thought it was going to go away once they got married, but it just magnified either when they had children or as they got older. So I think when somebody gets married, maybe that person or their spouse has a mental health condition and they're not realizing what it is in that moment. And then it just progresses as they continue with the relationship. So then that's often a reason why they want to get divorced. And then they often say, well, okay, now I want to get a divorce and I hate this piece of them. Like, this is the piece that I cannot stand. But they need to realize, well, that's something that they always dealt with, and how can we navigate it moving forward?
Are there, mental health is a catch-all for a lot of different conditions. In your experience, have you noticed there are certain mental health issues or mental health conditions that tend to affect a marriage or a divorce more negatively than others?
I think anxiety and depression, they're typically hand in hand. If someone's suffering from anxiety, they're most likely also suffering from depression. And how does that impact not only their work, but their relationship with their spouse, family? And then there's the more serious or more, taboo ones where people, oh, they're a narcissist. Everybody's a narcissist nowadays. There's these buzzwords of gaslighting, but I would say anxiety and depression are the most prevalent.
So when somebody has anxiety and depression, what symptoms or behaviors do they exhibit in the context of divorce that makes the divorce more challenging? Like, in other words, if I'm going to be divorcing someone who's got anxiety and depression, what am I in for? What is that going to look like, typically?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess it depends on what level this person is suffering from depression or anxiety. I've seen most often with depression, it's they're dating and their spouse doesn't, or their boyfriend or girlfriend or whoever doesn't do a lot. Like, they're the ones planning the dates. They're the ones doing the grocery shopping, planning the trips. And they're in the honeymoon phase, so they think that's okay. But then when that person becomes a parent, now they're laying in bed all day and watching TV and not helping you with that baby or that teenager, because their depression is just it's an inability to do daily functions as someone who doesn't suffer from depression. So then when they get divorced, it's, oh, my child can't stay with that person. They're in bed all day. How are they going to parent a child? Because this is what I've experienced.
And what do you say to a person like that? Because that's a legitimate concern. I mean, as the child gets older, I mean, it's a very different concern for a teenager than it is for a 2-year-old. But even still, let's say you are that parent of a young child and you're worried that your spouse isn't gonna step up because they haven't in the past. What do you say to that parent?
That's a great question. It's going to depend on how the age. I mean, if it's a teenager, you're exactly right. That teenager is going to be able to be more vocal and say, well, they're most likely going to be able to take care of themselves on day to day, or say, well, mom or dad or mom was in bed all day. This is what we did, or this is what I had to do for myself. But if it's a younger child, I often recommend resources such as, okay, well, let's get a guardian ad litem appointed who can do that research, talk to family members, talk to that person's mental health provider, talk to their employer, and see how their depression is impacting other ways, other areas of their life, not just being a parent. But often what I've seen is maybe that mental health condition is more prevalent because they're relying on this other person to do all of these things so they can be in more of that depressive state. So it may be a situation where, okay, well, they don't have that person to rely on them anymore, so maybe they are going to seek some help or learn some things that can get them out of bed and get them to be a better, more present parent. Now that they're the only parent there that time, they're not going to be able to rely on that other person.
Well, let's talk about where mental health and the legal system intersect, right? So you've got this person, you're married to somebody, they've got depression as an issue, you're worried about their ability to parent when you're not there. How does the legal system act or react to that person? If I come in and I say, oh, they're depressed all the time, does the judge immediately say, well, they need supervised visitation, or what, like, how does all of that work?
So no, that's another really good question. And no, so mental health, there is a stigma attached to it still, unfortunately. But at least in the court system, the judges are saying, okay, you have a mental health condition, but are you taking care of yourself? What are you doing to seek treatment? It's not automatically, okay, this person has a mental health condition, they get no parenting time, and we're going to go strict supervised visits until you prove me otherwise. In fact, it's quite the contrary. It's, we're going to start at a 50-50 custody schedule, and you have to show me why we're off, why we need to get off that 50-50 schedule. And just because mom or dad or the spouse is saying they're depressed, well, what does that really mean in your eyes versus what's really going on at home?
Yeah, I have another question too, because you mentioned guardian ad litem, and I think that this is an area where a lot of non-lawyers get confused. When you talk about guardian ad litem, A, what is this? And B, what is a guardian ad litem? And number two, how long is the guardian in place? Is the guardian someone that like sort of oversees the raising of the child till they're 18? How does that work?
So a guardian ad litem is an advocate for the child. They are appointed to represent the best interest of that child. So it's an attorney. So I could be a guardian ad litem in a case that I'm not representing either parent. And so what I would do is I would meet the child, I would talk to the teachers, the coaches, the therapists, the grandparents, the friends, get to understand what that child looks like and how time with one parent is versus the other parent. And then I would be involved through a custody hearing to say to the judge, here's my investigation, here's what it yields, here's my recommendation on a custody schedule and then legal custody as well. And then I would go to the court and say, testify, be asked questions. And then in my experience, at least, I'm seeing judges rely on those investigations because that's your boots on the ground. And then as far as if it's still a high conflict case or there's still, because you're not going to have that guardian ad litem appointed for forever, I would recommend a parenting coordinator, another person who can call balls and strikes between the parents, keeping in mind the best interests of the child now that that guardian ad litem is no longer involved.
So it sounds like, and I know this from being a lawyer, but just for the benefit of the audience, that guardian ad litems are in place for the life of the case, the legal case. But once your divorce is over, the guardian goes away, correct?
Once the custody piece is over, not necessarily the divorce. If they've reached a permanent trial and they've said, okay, this is what the custody schedule is going to be like, usually the guardian ad litem is released at that point.
Okay. So the guardian doesn't even last through the whole case oftentimes if the custody is resolved. And then you mentioned parenting coordinator. What is the difference between a guardian ad litem and a parenting coordinator?
A parenting coordinator does not represent anybody. They are, I like to refer to them as a mini judge within a case. They
Okay.
are talking with the parents, again, the coaches and the teachers, but they're to help reduce conflict between the parents. Okay, parents can't agree on whether Lucy needs braces. She's got a big gap in her tooth, and dad says, okay, that gives her a lot of character. I think that's great. And mom says, no, the orthodontist says she needs braces. They can't reach a decision. They can go to the parenting coordinator, help us make a decision, and the parenting coordinator can actually make that decision for them. It keeps them out of court, keeps litigation down, and it keeps high conflict cases tamer.
What if one parent doesn't like the decision that the parenting coordinator make? Are they just stuck with it, or can they go on back to court to the judge?
They can go to court and they can go to the judge. 9 times out of 10, at least in my experience, the judge is going to listen to what the parenting coordinator says, because that parenting coordinator is usually an attorney or a therapist. They've done their research. They've talked to the orthodontist. They've talked to mom. They've talked to dad. They've talked to everybody involved, and they made the decision based on all of that information.
So let's rewind a little bit and going back to the mental health issue. If somebody is facing, let's say that they are the person with the depression and the anxiety, and they're worried if they get a divorce that will be used against them, that maybe they won't get to see their kids, or they won't get as much money, or whatever the fear is. How does that actually play into the divorce case and into the whole scenario? Because people think a lot of things that maybe aren't so true.
Yes. So if they're suffering from something but they're getting help, that's not going to impact their case. As if they are suffering from something, it's negatively impacting their life, their ability to parent. That's one thing. But if they're seeking help, just like if you and I were sick and we had the flu and we didn't want to get everybody contagious, we'd go to the doctor and get some medicine. It's just taking care of yourself and making sure you're being the best version of yourself that you can be, learning how to manage this mental health condition.
So it sounds like if somebody has a mental health condition, whatever that is, if it's under control, if they're taking care of it, they're getting the help that they need, that shouldn't be a factor in whether they get to see their kids or what happens in their divorce.
Yes, I mean, the main thing judges want, because at least in North Carolina, this is a best interest state. So what is best for that child? And if it's typically a healthy relationship with their parent, and even if that parent has a mental health condition, so long as that parent is healthy and they have a healthy relationship with their child, a judge is going to do whatever they can to continue helping that relationship.
So let's take a pause and talk about for a moment process. Because as you and I both know, there's a lot of different ways to get divorced these days. There's mediation, there's collaborative divorce. Some states have arbitration, then there's traditional go to court litigation. So there's a lot of ways to do this. If you are in a marriage with someone who has a mental health issue, or you have the mental health issue, is there a particular divorce process that would be better for you than others?
I am a big fan of mediation. I think mediation gives everybody a voice versus walking into a courtroom, meeting a judge who's a complete stranger and who's only going to get to know your case for about an hour or two and then say, okay, I made this decision. Now who's next? So I'm a big proponent of mediation. I think it gives parties control. I think it allows them to get creative. And quite honestly, you have to go to mediation, at least in North Carolina, if there's an issue related to kids or property distribution. So I always start my cases off with, let's go to mediation. Let's see if we can resolve this. Let's keep it amicable, because that's going to allow for a better co-parenting relationship anyways after you all resolve it, versus going in front of a judge and tearing one another apart.
Yeah, I know though some people are really reluctant. Let's if we want to narrow mental health down to narcissism, which is what so many people are talking about these days. Um, there's a split school of thought. Some people say you can't mediate with a narcissist because they're just never going to agree because of their mental health condition. You're just going to spin in circles. But yet at the same time, there's another school of people, maybe even the same people, who say, but when you put a narcissist in court, that's their playground, that they're very grandiose, that they thrive on the conflict. So what's the answer? What's the best divorce process for somebody who has or whose spouse has some sort of personality disorder like narcissism?
I'm still always going to say try mediation. To me, it's not going to hurt. If at the worst case scenario, you don't resolve it at mediation, well, then you've checked off a requirement, but also maybe you're learning a little bit about what it is they want. And maybe what they want isn't as bad as what you thought it was going to be. And you can get creative on the language to give them what they want, but still putting some precaution in there. Also, I think it's a little bit of a strategy. Okay, now I get to know what they want. So before going to court, maybe I need to do more discovery, or maybe I need to schedule a deposition. So to me, I think mediation gives you a variety of benefits compared to the outlay of, okay, we spent a day, we didn't resolve it. All right.
What do you think? Again, if you're the person with the issue, I know a lot of people with mental health issues, obviously, it's very, very sensitive, and they have a therapist, and they're worried that if they become involved in a divorce, especially a litigated divorce, that their therapist could be deposed or called to testify, and that all of the things that they thought were private in therapy will now, all their dirty laundry will be aired. I know this is an area that where the law might vary state to state, but in your experience in North Carolina, is that something people need to be worried about? And if so, what can they do about it?
There's ways to get around that to precaution yourself or protect yourself. I mean, first I would talk to your therapist. Are you somebody that, will go to court or won't go to court? And then if it's okay, well, I want this therapy to only be for my resource and my resource only, then make sure it's a therapist who's very adamant about not going to court. And then talk to your attorney. I don't ever want them to be brought up to court, and they can file motion to quash, motion for protective order. There are things they can do to protect that relationship. But I've also seen people say, okay, well, I'm going to choose this therapist for my child at least because I see how this other person's mental health is impacting them. Or my child has mental health issues, and I want the court to be aware of that when deciding who's going to be with the custody or the physical custody. So some therapists do go to court, and people strategically choose that therapist knowing that they will go to court and testify as a way to advocate for their child.
You bring up an interesting point about what if the child has mental health issues. If you've got a child who's got some sort of mental health issue, how do you deal with that in the context of divorce and family, and family law, and especially if maybe the other parent isn't on board with all the same treatment you want. I see this happen often. One parent wants to medicate the child, the other parent says no, they don't need medication. How do those kinds of issues typically get resolved?
I would advise them to get a guardian ad litem or a parenting coordinator involved, and then I would have a joint session with the therapist. Or if, like you said, if it's one parent doesn't see that this child is suffering from any mental health and they don't even want to have a therapist involved, then there's avenues that you can go through the court system to get those people appointed, to get final decision making so that I can make decisions to get my child in front of a therapist. I think, especially as the child gets older, teachers are going to notice things that can advocate for them, coaches, uh, friends of parents, people who are around that child. You're not going to be the only one noticing things. So, having a good foundation surrounding you, I think, is also going to be important to combat and show the other side is wrong.
So what do you think if somebody is thinking about divorce, but they haven't said anything yet, and their child is struggling, and they're not sure if their child has mental health issues or not? What would you say to that parent? Is it better to when do they get them in therapy? Because now if they get them in therapy, they got to talk to their spouse. Do they file for divorce, then wait? Like, what's the best? And I know it has to do with the best interest of the child, but how do you figure out what that is?
I would say take them to a therapist. I would say, even though they're married and they're contemplating the separation, I would say if you can get them into therapy now, do it, because it's going to be harder for the other person to say, well, now they need to be out of therapy once they're already in therapy. And separation, as we know, can cause more emotions, more people wanting to do things for revenge versus best interest of that child. So I would say get them in now, see what you can do to get them in now versus later.
How soon can a guardian ad litem be appointed? Because, from what I'm hearing you say, there's a separation period in North Carolina. If you're worried about your child and you want that guardian in there to advocate for them,
Mhm.
how do you get that set up? Like, how do you do that?
So first I always start with a letter. I really do. That's how I start my practice. I reach out to the other side and I say, here are the things that they're exhibiting. Here's what I would recommend: getting a guardian ad litem appointed. And if the other side, to me, if it was me and there's nothing to hide, I'm gonna say, okay, yeah, go ahead and get a guardian ad litem, because who knows, it may benefit my client. Then, if they're still opposed, you can file a motion to get a guardian ad litem appointed, or at least in Mecklenburg County, which is in Charlotte, North Carolina, there's Council for Children's Rights, which is a nonprofit. They're a best interest attorney. And so instead of paying a private attorney an hourly rate to be your guardian ad litem, you're paying an application fee with Council for Children's Rights, and it's a sliding scale on their income.
Interesting. And so they act as the guardians. I mean, they
Yes.
would be the one appoint, and the guardians have to be appointed by the court, right? This isn't an independent hire kind of thing.
Well, if you agree to it, you can enter into a consent order that says this is this person's role, here is their authority, because that person's going to want to talk to the therapist. They're going to want to talk to providers or physicians or pediatricians. So you have to have an order in place to give that person the authority to do that. But if the other side's not agreeing, then you'd have to go to court and get the judge to do it.
Well, and let's talk about, speaking of agreements that are made, because we both know if you're divorcing and you have children, you're going to have some sort of a parenting agreement, custody agreement, something that lays out how you will parent this child or your children until they're 18 years old or whatever the age of majority is in your state. So if I'm dealing with a spouse who has mental health issues, are there special kinds of provisions I should be thinking about having in my custody or parenting agreement that deal with that?
So it's funny that you say that, because I was actually at a mediation yesterday, and I think this was kind of coming up. So we got them to agree to a parenting coordinator without a hearing. So I think that's a great way to preempt some issues down the road, because you know someone's going to be in your case calling balls and strikes. And then the other idea somebody had was getting a co-parenting therapist, and then having that person agree to attend some co-parenting sessions, not only with just the parties, but their parenting coordinator as well. So the parenting coordinator gets to hear the resources and advice the co-parenting therapist is giving, so that there's no telephone. Like, we all heard the same thing. And I think that's a great way to keep everybody on the same page and some transparency.
Okay, part of what I'm hearing, which is wonderful, like first of all, I hope everybody out there listening understands there's a lot of different, very specialized professionals who can handle different pieces of the divorce. But what I'm hearing as a human is, whoa, what is that going to cost me? Like this person and this person and this person. What
Mhm.
would you say about that?
I would say a parenting coordinator, because that's split between the parties.
You mean
So
the payment?
the payment is split between the parties. That's
Okay.
going to cost you guys a lot less than one person paying their attorney, another person paying their attorney, and then fighting it out in court.
And what about all these, like the co-parenting therapy? What, like in those kinds of situations, who pays for that?
I would recommend that everybody try to get at least a 50-50 split, because you got to have skin in the game. Now, granted, if somebody is not going to agree to pay equal, I still think it's going to benefit you to go. So even if it's a 60-40 split, a 70-30, so long as there's some skin in the game where they're saying, okay, well, I'm paying for this, so I better get some use or some benefit out of it.
And how long can a parenting coordinator or co-parenting therapist, I mean, I know you said the guardian, their role ends once custody is decided or agreed to. What about these other professionals? How long do they stay around?
Again, it can get creative. So parenting coordinators can stay in through the duration of your child. So when they turn 18, at least in North Carolina. Or if parties are, sometimes they put a year limit on them. They say, okay, get us through this first year and then they're done. They're out unless someone wants them to stay in. But the nice thing about a parenting coordinator, which also goes with the cost concern, is if you guys are getting along, maybe you are going to the co-parenting therapist and you don't need a parenting coordinator because there's not as much conflict, then you're not getting a bill and you're not really using them.
Mm-hmm. Do you do they bill by the hour typically? Like you get charged based on how much you use them, or you're just going to get charged no matter what?
You get charged and how much you use them, similar to if you were to hire an attorney. It's an hourly rate.
Okay. And, so you've got, let's say you're not using the parenting coordinator. Since the court appointed them, do you have to go back to court to get them unappointed?
No, if everybody's agreeing that they're no longer needed, the parenting coordinator will draft a simple consent order to be released, and everybody just signs it and submits it to the judge.
Okay. So what I'm hearing you say is one of the avenues or one of the things to think about if there's a parent who's got a mental health issue, one thing to think about in the custody provisions is to say we need a parenting coordinator. But what do you do if things haven't risen to that level, or you don't have the money or want to spend on a parenting coordinator? What other kinds of provisions might people consider putting in their custody or parenting agreement to help them deal with the realities of the mental health issues that they're experiencing in their family?
So I say to all my clients, what is your biggest concern? What are you noticing every day with that parent? If so, we can create a rule about it. We can create a rule to put in some sort of agreement that says, okay, maybe, the other spouse can't bring the child around his new girlfriend or their new boyfriend every 2 weeks. So what is something that you're concerned about that you're seeing? Or maybe if that person's depressed, no screens from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. and then again not until 5 p.m. What are some things that you're seeing that are red flags to you that we can put into an agreement and say no more of this? And again, I think that's a benefit of going to mediation because you get to be creative in that sense. And then the other thing I did want to circle back on real quick, when you're selecting your parenting coordinator or your mediator, and you are either the person with mental health issue or you think the other person has a mental health issue or the child does, I would encourage you to really ask your attorney, say, who do you think is going to be a good mediator to deal with these complicated issues? Who's going to be sympathetic? Who has really good experience with this? So that's a really big issue too, just making sure you're strategically thinking who can help us the best.
Yeah, I think that's a problem that a lot of people face because, for people who are in the business, people like you and me, we know who's who, right? And so somebody could say, hey, who do you know that specializes in blah, blah, blah? And I can send them names. But to a normal person out in in the world, they're going to go to the internet and you can't tell one person from another.
Right.
So how would you recommend, besides, maybe going to their attorney, where else can they figure out what professionals do they need? What kind of help can they get themselves, their child, their spouse even? What's out there and how do they find somebody with those credentials?
Well, I'm always going to say go to a therapist first. They're going to know, okay, these are the things that you're dealing with, whether it's you, your spouse, or your child. And typically, a good therapist is going to know a good attorney who's going to go know a good mediator because like attracts like. And if you are like minded, you're going to have a like minded resource book. So I would start there. Also, at least our website, I love our Sodoma Law website because it has really good resources. What are some options for you? A guardian ad litem, a parenting coordinator, and then you can flesh those out. So if there's some attorneys in your office, really find a good website because a lot of them have blogs or resources, things of that nature.
Yeah, I think that's really good and important advice for people to hear. You know, in my opinion, I know there's good and bad in every profession, but divorce lawyers get a really bad rap, right?
Mhm.
Some well deserved, some maybe not so. But one of the things, people are so tempted to go the DIY route now with
Mhm.
divorce. And I think what you're highlighting is that one of the things that an attorney will bring to the table that people don't think about is their network,
Yes. And
because
strategy, getting
yeah,
creative.
yeah, because like you said, so you were talking about all these things that you can do in terms of mediation. What options or opportunities are available if you're divorcing in the court system and you've got a spouse with a mental illness?
Well, I think it's okay, do we need a parenting coordinator? Do we need a guardian ad litem? Do we need a parenting capacity evaluation? So it's what level are you wanting to go? What are really the concerns and how can we address those concerns quickly, efficiently? Because the longer you go without somebody to help address them, the more difficult it's going to be. I say my goal as an attorney is to get you to your next chapter quick, efficiently, and prepared. I don't want clients staying with us forever.
No?
No.
You just mentioned a word capacity. And have you ever, I know what some people worry about if their spouse has a mental health issue, that they don't have the capacity to get a divorce. Have you ever run across that? And if so, what do you do in that circumstance?
When you say capacity to get a divorce, do you mean like the actual divorce or do you mean dealing with the things in between?
The actual divorce, that the other parent has a mental illness that rises to the level that it makes you question, do they know what they're doing? Could they sign a legal document and have it be binding? What if they're really, really struggling with mental health issues? What do you do? Are you just stuck?
No, there's resources. I mean, we have an estate planning attorney in our office who does work on guardianships and things like that. So if somebody is mentally incapable of making decisions for themselves, we have to say, okay, well, who is appointed as their power of attorney? You have to look at those kinds of routes. I have a client right now where he's not mentally capable of making decisions. So his daughter has been appointed as power of attorney, and I've been working with her to help him get their situation resolved. So it's just asking the right questions, figuring out who's been appointed, and then going through that route.
So it sounds like that person, if they truly lacked the capacity to understand what they were doing, somebody else would be a guardian for them. I mean, we're not talking about guardian for the children. We're talking about a guardian for one of the spouses, right?
That's right.
Wow. Um, and what do you do when that person with the mental illness is like, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. Now what?
That would be a question I would leave to a judge.
You're a smart woman, it sounds
Thank
like.
you.
So but I have to tell you, this has really been enlightening because it's something in general, mental health is something that a lot of people still don't want to talk about. It's kind of hidden, it's in the closet. And as you and I both know, that when you're in a family law divorce situation or a custody situation, these issues come out and they can't stay in the closet. So I really appreciate your bringing all of this to light for people to give them some idea of what they can do. Now, my last question is, if they really liked what they heard, where can they find you?
You're so sweet. You can find me on Sodoma Law Belmont's website, and then my email is Gajewski, my last name, at sodomalaw.com, and I'm happy to help or answer any other questions if anyone has anything.
Chelsea, you have been a wealth of information. I really appreciate your sharing it all. And for anyone who's listening, we will link in the show notes to Sodoma Law, to you, so there's plenty of ways that people can, if they can't find you any other way, they can always come to the podcast, look at the show notes, they can do it through there. So Chelsea, thank you so much again for sharing all your wisdom. And for those of you out there who are listening, if you like what you saw, if you like what you heard, please do me a big favor, subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel, give it all a thumbs up, and I look forward to talking with you again next time.